Welcome to Yahoo Finance Sports Report, a unique look at the business of sports, brought to you by Yahoo Finance and Yahoo Sports. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano, and I'm here to coach you through the financial game. We'll look beyond the headlines, analyze all the latest sports news, the teams, the trades, and billion-dollar deals, so you and your portfolio will win big. This week, we are talking about Juan Soto and his new $765 million contract with the New York Mets, Paige Bueckers' new partnership with Nike, and how Taylor Swift is making an impact on sporting venues. Plus, we've got Golden State Valkyries president Jess Smith here to discuss all things WNBA. Let's huddle up and get right into it. All right, it's time for this week's Pomps Playbook, where I take a look at some of the biggest headlines in sports that you and your portfolio need to know. Let's kick things off with Stephen A. Smith's new contract at ESPN. So for those of that missed it, Stephen A. Smith is currently negotiating a new contract extension at ESPN. Andrew Marchand of The Athletic recently reported that his new deal is going to be worth $20 million annually. Now, the years have yet to be decided. It could be a 5 or a 6-year deal, meaning it will be worth more than $100 to $120 million in total. The important thing to talk about here is that this would be the highest contract for an on-air talent in ESPN's 45-year history. It's more than guys like Troy Aikman, Joe Buck, and even Pat McAfee. The reason why this is so important and unique is because Stephen A. Smith isn't necessarily tied to live sports rights like Troy Aikman and Joe Buck, who are representing ESPN's massive multi-billion-dollar investment in Monday Night Football. And he doesn't have a licensing deal for his company like Pat McAfee, whose deal also includes Pat McAfee paying all of his employees, renting the studio space, and paying guest fees. So Stephen A. Smith is sort of an outlier, and it's why many people were shocked to hear that he could make $20 million annually, which is a sizable increase from his current $12 million annual deal. But I think the reason why ESPN is doing this is because they're going to be able to divvy up the contract in a number of different ways. ESPN will pay part of it. They'll also pay his production company for First Take. ESPN Bet will do a licensing deal with him to pay another portion of the contract for their new betting app. And Disney will also pay part of the contract as well, using him to sell with advertisers at their upfront awards each year. Stephen A. Smith is obviously an integral part of ESPN. He's the host of First Take, the most popular morning sports talk show on television, and they make a lot of money from that too. So he's going to be an important piece as they try to transition viewers to streaming. And I think ultimately it will be a good deal for ESPN, even though some people may not agree with the price tag at the beginning. Next up, I want to talk about Paige Bueckers. So Paige Bueckers is obviously one of the most important stars in college basketball today on the women's side. She also has an NIL deal with Nike, and now Nike has designed and allowed her to launch a new Nike Player Edition basketball sneaker. Several of her teammates have actually been wearing the shoe at the inaugural Women's Champions Classic this past weekend in Louisville. And this is a huge deal because not many women's college basketball players have ever gotten Player Edition sneakers, especially from a brand like Nike. Now, for those of you that don't know, there's obviously signature shoes, which is what someone like a LeBron James or a Caitlin Clark now has with Nike, where they design and they release their own shoes widespread across the entire market. But Player Edition shoes are just one step below that, where Nike doesn't necessarily give Paige Bueckers her own shoe, but they work with her to design a specific edition of a current shoe on their roster that they release in limited edition quantities. This is an awesome opportunity for Paige because she gets to go behind the scenes and design some of this stuff with Nike, and her fans also get to go buy the shoes in limited edition quantities on the Nike app. Next up is the LPGA, because they did a record $209 million in revenue last year. The reason why this is such a big deal is because, one, it's the first time they've ever hit $200 million in annual revenue, but it's also a sizable increase from the $180 million they did last year in revenue. Most of this money is still coming from tournaments at $123 of the $209 million, but sponsorships are another pretty big bucket at $22 million last year. This also means that the LPGA is now profitable for the second year in a row, turning in $7 million in profit in 2022 and another $6 million in 2023. But don't expect this to stay for much longer. There's been a little bit of commotion at the LPGA recently, with the current commissioner stepping down in lieu of Chief Legal Officer Liz Moore stepping up to take over the commissioner role. And Golf Week is now reporting that the LPGA will fall $2 million in the red this year. We'll see if this can continue over the next few years, but prize money is still increasing, up from $100 million to $130 million next year. This week for the Deeper Dive, where I give you a play-by-play analysis of news in the sports world and its significance to your bottom line. We're talking about Juan Soto's record-breaking $765 million contract with the New York Mets. Now, for those of you that missed it, Juan Soto was a free agent this offseason after his World Series win with the New York Yankees, and he recently signed a new contract with the New York Mets valued at $765 million over 15 years. Not only is this the largest contract in Major League Baseball history, but it's the largest contract in professional sports history. It's 5 years longer than Ohtani's, but it's worth $65 million more. And given that there are opt-out agreements throughout the course of the contract, it could be worth more than $800 million by the time this is all said and done. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this today for today's deep dive is because I don't really think it's a great deal. In fact, I think most people would agree that it's a massive overpay for a player like Juan Soto. If you go back and you look at the largest contracts in Major League Baseball history, before Shohei Ohtani signed his deal at $700 million last offseason, it was Mike Trout with the largest deal in MLB history at $426 million. Now, Ohtani's deal was super unique because at $700 million, that number essentially really didn't mean anything because there were so many deferrals. 68 out of his $70 million annual salary was deferred, meaning he only gets paid $2 million in cash each year by the Dodgers. So the way that Major League Baseball calculates this for salary tax purposes is they use the present value of future cash flows, meaning that they valued Ohtani's contract at $460 million, which is obviously a pretty big increase from the $426 that Mike Trout had, but it's not massive, and it's nowhere close to Juan Soto's near $800 million contract. So why did the New York Mets do this? Well, we don't really know. The real reason is because Steve Cohen is the owner. He's one of the 100 richest people in the world and by far the richest owner in Major League Baseball today, and he wants to win. So he was willing to pay whatever it took, even if it doesn't make great financial sense. Because if you look at the Dodgers, I mean, they're making more than $100 million in additional revenue off Ohtani alone with new Japanese sponsors and increased ticket sales and everything like that. Juan Soto is a great player. He's a phenomenal player. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but I don't think he's worth $800 million, primarily because he doesn't bring that same international marketing appeal that Ohtani does with the Dodgers. But if the New York Mets win a World Series, all will be forgotten. Steve Cohen will get his childhood dream of having the New York Mets win a World Series, and no one will really care that he spent a couple extra $100 million on a player like Juan Soto. We've made it to the one-on-one, a conversation where I get to break down news and sports with a key player in the industry. This week, I'm joined by Golden State Valkyries president, Jess Smith, here to discuss all things WNBA. How are you doing today, Jess?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. I'd like to start with just the last year have been. You obviously came over to the Valkyries at the beginning of this past year after spending some time at Angel City. There's a lot to do on the expansion front. If you can just describe how the last 12 months have gone for you in the franchise.
How much time do we have exactly to cover this? It has been unbelievable. There's a few things that you really need to get this right. The first is ownership, right? You can't steer away from really having the support of a group that understands what you're building and is going to give you the resource that you need to make it successful. So very fortunate to have Joe and Peter and the entire ownership group of Golden State as a part of that. The second is really taking the time. When I came in February, there were a lot of people wanting to have a lot of conversations. Hey, I'd like to buy season tickets. Hey, I'm interested in working on a brand partnership with you. We needed to take a minute and understand who we were first, who the Valkyries were, and at that time, what our name was going to be, how we were going to portray ourselves in this world, what that meant, so that we could invite people in to be a part of what we're building the right way and make sure that we really stay true to how we're going to build this legacy that's so important to every stakeholder that we have. So it involves really dedicated work to getting that done, hiring really well, having a great team, that's able to execute the vision that we have, and candidly continuing to listen to our community. One of the pieces of our whole brand launch is the Valkyries name actually came from our fans. There was a article in the San Francisco Times that had said, if you could name the team one thing, what would it be? And 25% of people wrote in Valkyries. So that immediately put it on the radar. And we've really taken that to heart. The entire building of this organization, we get asked a lot of questions about what comes next. And my answer is always, I don't know yet. We need to talk to the fans and really hear what they want to say.
Yeah, and you mentioned there briefly about how Joe and Peter and the Golden State Warriors organization have been extremely helpful to you guys. And I'd love to just double tap on that for a second, because if you think about a new sports organization, I mean, you were at Angel City before this, you understand this, but when you start a sports team, it's incredibly expensive. Obviously, you have to get into the league. You have to pay a fee in most cases. You have to go build out a staff. You have to attract fans. You have to do marketing, all this stuff. What are some of the advantages that the Warriors give you guys as a new team that other teams might not be able to access, right? So some things that come to mind for me are maybe simple things like, when you go out and you want to go sell season tickets, you already have fans that are interested in season tickets because of the Warriors. You're able to fill an arena that may be empty on other nights without concerts or NBA games or things like that. Are there other things that come to mind that are extremely helpful having that connection with the Warriors?
I'm smirking because the interesting piece of our season ticket base, which we have close to 21,000 deposit holders now, less than 5% crossover fans. So one of the misconceptions in women's sports is that it's the same audience, even if it's the same sport in the same market. We're under the same ownership group and we have a completely different audience. That doesn't mean that there won't be fans of each team, crossing over. In fact, we expect that and look forward to growing the Golden State fandom. It does mean, though, that the fans that are buying season tickets are different, right? And that therein lies the opportunity. And that's actually how we've built this team, right? So we've built it by making sure that we are building it for that unique audience that is looking to show up for the Valkyries themselves and maybe not necessarily go to a Warriors game, which is totally okay. The resources that we have, and I think we're going to truly set a playbook when you're looking at a shared ownership group, is that they've invested in a dedicated staff. We'll have close to 50 staff members by the time we tip off that are specific Valkyries employees. And to your point, the things that are helpful is we have back of house support, legal, finance, et cetera. That certainly gives us a key advantage. And the one thing that, you brushed on as well is facilities. The fact that this ownership group owns our venue, wants us to succeed there, gives us access to the dates that we need to maximize the product that we have, both for us and the league, as well as a practice facility, is a big deal. And if it says anything about this ownership group, within my first couple of months, we were really talking through practice facility options, and we have the space in Oakland, and we were talking about game day experience in Chase Center, and they dedicated, some heavy investment to build a campus inside Chase Center, which is 5 years old, specific to the Valkyries. So they have their own home there, and renovate our practice facility in Oakland, which will be Valkyries themed.
With 21,000 season ticket deposits, you guys may end up doing the opposite, which is bringing some fans to the Warriors, which is an interesting storyline to follow over the next few years for sure. But we just had the expansion draft, which is a sort of unique process in and of itself, where the Valkyries get to go around and pick specific players off different teams. There's some rules around who you can and can't pick, and then obviously you'll participate in the draft and free agency. What has that entire process been like, actually building the team from the ground up with players?
Thankfully, I have an incredible general manager in Ohema, and she is an expert in all things. She most recently joins us from the New York Liberty, who just won the championship with the WNBA and has extensive experience internationally as well with a background in USA basketball. So she has been hard at work thinking through what these lists were going to look like, what the team can be made up of. And one of the things that she shares, with us too, is that she's really looking for good human beings that also excel at their craft. And she really took that approach when you're looking at the roster that's been filled out to date with the select folks that we have from the expansion draft. But the process is stressful for everybody involved, to be honest, right? There's, the athletes, the teams, ourselves, and it's a quick turnaround. That list was received 10 days before we were given, before we gave the selections to the league. And we had to then pull off an incredible event with ESPN and everything in between. But most importantly, make sure that these athletes, were communicated to by us and then, had the opportunity to react to being a part of history.
All right, we've got to take a quick break, but we'll be back with Jess Smith right after this. Welcome back to Yahoo Finance Sports Report. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano. I'm here with Golden State Valkyries president, Jess Smith. When I talk to different commissioners or league representatives or coaches, managers, presidents, et cetera, across a variety of different sports, but specifically in women's sports, one of the things I hear is that brands are really excited about the growth of women's sports, particularly when it comes to sponsorships, and they see a lot of opportunity there to grow those sponsorships over time. How has that trended for you guys over the first few months, and then what do you expect that to go to over the next few years?
Yeah, I'm personally passionate about this side of our business, having done that for over a decade and getting to the Valkyries and having the opportunity to take the experience I had with Angel City and then bring it here in the WNBA, in the Bay Area, under the Golden State umbrella and create a product moving forward with brands has been tremendous. We already have some brands that we've announced, whether it's JP Morgan Chase and Kaiser Permanente on our jersey or CarMax that we announced this week. And there's many more to come. And the playbook for that that together is really approaching it for the unique product that we just talked about with this unique audience, right? Not just replicating what you're doing elsewhere, but really taking into account from a brand perspective that this is a unique audience that is a mix of sport and purpose and culture together. So how do we come together to enhance our brands, create fan engagement, and really give the fans what they're looking for from both brands? And the loyalty is unmatched. When you're talking to the brand side of folks that have already invested in women's sports now for many years, they're seeing that. They understand that our fans really appreciate their investment in women's sports. They understand that that's progressing the world they want to see move forward. And therefore, the results are there for the taking. So it's really just getting started on the brand side when it comes to investment standpoints. And I'm excited to see who else continues to come to the table.
Yeah, the WNBA has obviously seen tremendous growth over the last few years, and specifically within the last 12 months or so. What do you think is the next unlock for the league, right? Is it just getting better players in the league? Is it more marketing from the networks that you guys have partnered with over the last, year and going into the future? Just talk to me a little bit about how you think the WNBA makes the next step.
It's everything, and it's everything working together, right? So the media deal is a huge component of the continued visibility, produced games, et cetera, that we're going to see. These athletes, their individual likeness is just continuing to grow exponentially and on top of the talent that's going to be coming into the league for the foreseeable future, right? As people are already watching and taking note of the next potential draftees coming into the WNBA and taking the court against some now legacy players that people have been watching for many years. But most importantly, it's consumers, right? I referenced this earlier, but consumers are the ones that have pushed this growth. There was this unlock moment during the bubble, during the pandemic, where everyone was watching the W and realized, oh, me watching, me buying merchandise, me showing up. That's actually what's queuing to media, it's queuing to brands, it's queuing to these teams to keep investing if I reward them. And that's not slowing down anytime soon. The WNBA specifically, their audience is young, it's diverse, and it's continuing to get younger and more diverse. And that's an incredible opportunity to make sure we're building community, but also bringing something that really reflects our society, which many leagues cannot say that way. So I know you asked, what's the unlock? It's unlocked. It's just all of these pieces moving together to continue to move it forward. Expansion is going to obviously be a huge piece with the Toronto tempo and Portland coming in 2026, following Golden State as well. And we're going to see a lot of change and a lot of growth throughout this league from existing teams and certainly from new teams.
When the Valkyries went through the WNBA expansion process, and I just thought of this at the moment because you mentioned some of the other teams, and I know they're looking at potentially another team after that as well. What were some of the things that really set the Valkyries apart for the WNBA and ended up winning you guys the bid?
That's a great question. That's before my time, so I can't necessarily speak to it. But I would say if I'm the WNBA looking at Golden State, how do you not have this team a part of the WNBA? Number one, the market. The San Francisco Bay Area market is a market that the whole world looks to see what comes next, whether you're talking about technology innovation or how we treat people or being progressive. So the thought of how do we actually use that and bring it into this league with that type of power, which complements what the league is growing, a great opportunity there. Number two, ownership, right? This group is a storied ownership group that invests in winning, which is what everyone wants to see, and has every single plan to replicate that both for the WNBA, just like they do within the NBA. And number three is really thinking through just the media market opportunity, right? There's a lot of women's sports fans in Northern California. There's a lot of WNBA fans in Northern California. How are we giving them a home team? And so I think, though, if I'm the league, those are three pieces outside of course, the intricacies of the bid itself, that really makes sense for that first expansion since 2008 when Atlanta came in.
So the Valkyries recently released their jersey, unveiling that over the last few weeks. Can you just tell me a little bit about what went into that process?
It was exhausting in the best way. In building our brand so quickly, this incredible marketer on the Warriors side, Amanda Chin, is actually who led us through that process. She was working on it even before I joined, was a big deal. But obviously turning that around and getting a jersey out for production that we can then share in months' time was a huge deal. What you'll see from this year's jerseys are they're classic. We wanted our logo front and center in a very prominent way. We're a brand new team, and it's meant to really, embark on year one, making sure people see the strength, and the boldness of the Valkyries and the brand design and colors that we've shown that allow us to progress that certainly moving forward from 2025. But there's a lot of conversations and intricacies, right? So even choosing a color in our brand process, That's really difficult, and there's only so many colors that you can choose from for us, we really had a few goals in mind. Like one, we wanted to own something where a color could really define our brand. And you look at the Bay Area market, there's a lot of colors being used already from the number of teams out there. You got, obviously the Giants, the 49ers, the Sharks, the BFC, et cetera. And number two, you look in the WNBA, right? Which same thing, there's some tremendous branding that exists within this league. So how do we carve out a space that's uniquely our own? There's a lot of back and forths with Nike and the league to get this process right.
And the last question I have, this is sort of loaded because as a new expansion team, I imagine there's a million different things that you're tracking and trying to do. But what does success look like, right? Like if you were to look back on the team in 2, 3, 4 years, what is success for the Valkyries as an expansion team in the WNBA?
It's remarkable because we're going to be launched in 6 months' time, and we've just finished our premium seating process where we just have a few seats remaining going into general seating next. And success to me looks like what we're seeing start to shape up, which is an atmosphere at Chase Center that no one's ever seen before in women's sports, because our fans are showing up in a way that are just unstoppable. And most importantly, it means that when people think of the Valkyries, they think of, doing what's right, not what's easy. They think of a brand, that is really representative of these incredible athletes and the communities that they represent in every way, shape, and form. So if we can unlock that respect in the marketplace, respect in the world, and then build an unmatched game experience, the end is really the future is really something to be excited about.
Thanks so much for joining us, Jess. The clock is winding down here, but we have just enough time for some final buzz. I want to end today's show by talking about Taylor Swift's impact on sports venues. Now, all of you have seen that Taylor Swift's 18-month, 152-show Eras Tour just ended. This thing was massive. It's the highest grossing concert tour ever at more than $2 billion in gross revenue, and Swift is now the only musical billionaire to make her money primarily from music alone. But the reason why I want to talk about today is that a dozen sports teams who own their own stadiums financially benefited from this tour. The reason for this is simple. If you look at her average concert, it produces about $10 million in ticket sales. She has a bunch of expenses, though, and the biggest one is actually renting out the venue itself. So that costs about $2 to $3 million per show, which the stadium venue gets to keep. Then these venues get to keep an additional $1 million or so in other things like concessions or merchandise, parking, etc. And the reason why this is so important is because there were a dozen sports teams that benefit from this. We're talking about Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, MetLife Stadium in New York, Gillette Stadium in Foxborough. These are NFL teams who own these venues themselves. They hosted multiple nights of these concerts, each of those venues at 3 nights each. That means they brought in $9 million to $12 million in additional revenue outside of their football team. And other venues benefited even more, like the Rogers Center in Toronto and SoFi Stadium in LA, who was owned by Stan Kroenke, the owner of the Rams, and a bunch of other sports teams as well. Those two stadiums hosted 6 separate nights of the concert, bringing in $18 million to $24 million in revenue. This is why owning your own venue as a professional sports team is so important, because you can fill that venue on nights when you don't have games with things like concerts. Even though Taylor Swift is a bit of an outlier, there are the College Football National Playoff, there are the Olympics in SoFi Stadium, and a bunch of other concerts as well. This is a huge financial benefit for some of these teams, and it's why some of these professional organizations now look less like sports teams and more like real estate companies. We're all out of time, so it's officially game over for this week. Thank you so much to Jess Smith and for all of you for joining us. Make sure to tune in to Yahoo Finance Sports Reports on Thursdays at 5 p.m., wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano. See you next time.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.